Welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. I have two big guests for you today. First, I'll speak with Ron Purser, the author of a book that is getting a lot of buzz, Mindfulness: How Mindfulness Became the New Capitalist Spirituality. Apparently, the mindfulness revolution is a bit of a con. In the second half, I have in studio the founder and executive director of Crushing Colonialism, an international indigenous multimedia collective. She's also a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, as well as an activist for the LGBT and disabled communities. On top of that, she's an incredible writer and journalist. We'll get into the controversy over Elizabeth Warren's native background, or lack thereof, plus the pipeline fights across the country and so much more. But first, here's my conversation with author Ron Purser. Hi, Ron. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me on.
So you've written a great book about mindfulness, which is a new hot trend over the past several years. I'm sure everyone's heard of it in one form or another. It seems like it's being used by just about every corporate industry in one way or another. Can we take a step back and maybe, for viewers, define mindfulness as it was originally taught, and then how the corporate capitalist mindfulness is being defined now?
Right. Well, as it was originally taught, it goes back 2,600 years ago, actually, to the teachings of the Buddha. And mindfulness was part of an integrated path of spiritual development, which included teachings on ethics and wisdom and compassion. And it was meant to uproot the ego, to let go of attachment to our sense of self, which is very different than what we see now in the marketplace. The so-called mindfulness revolution is something that I call into question, given that it's been highly commodified, instrumentalized, and turned into a technique for materialist gain, selling books. There's 100,000 books now on Amazon with the word mindful or mindfulness in the title, including mindful dog owners or mindful coloring books.
Yeah.
Even Kentucky Fried Chicken now has a commercial called The Comfort Zone of selling chicken pot pies using their pot pie-based meditation system.
Yeah, because when I see chicken pot pie, I immediately think mindfulness.
Yeah, okay. And, well, you might need a little mindfulness to digest it, but it's a $1.5 billion industry now. And basically, it's been reduced to a tool of self-discipline disguised as self-help. So it's really not revolutionary at all. It's really more of a coping mechanism that tells people they have to work on themselves and turn inwardly to find their authentic self, so to speak.
So what's wrong with, let's say, giving people another tool to help them deal with stress? I mean, yes, it's silly if it's used in commercials and things, but at the heart of it, what's wrong with that?
Well, it's been co-opted to promote a very privatized, highly individualistic spirituality. And it basically, the fundamental message is that stress and human distress is all inside our heads. So there are ideological components to the mindfulness movement and the messages that they're sending. The rhetoric is basically a tacit acceptance that we as individuals, the responsibility and the burden is put on individuals to deal with stress, which is really, in many cases, connected to political and economic and structural injustice and inequities. So in a way, it's kind of a neoliberal jujitsu, which places the burden and responsibility totally on the individual. So I really don't take issue with people that are getting some benefit from mindfulness, but I'm taking more issue with the ideological function that it's now playing in society.
You make some great points there, because the cold truth is that we kind of live in a system based on exploitation. The workers are exploited to make tremendous amounts of money for the ruling elite. And now that we're kind of in the later stages of this spiral, the stress on the shoulders of the working poor is heavier than ever. And historically, when a society gets to that point, you know, when the Gini coefficient gets high enough and the level of inequality is high enough, the people start to rebel, start to fight back. But if you have those people afraid and separated or atomized, then it's a lot easier to kind of keep them in line. So talk a little more about how this secular mindfulness fits into that equation of separating people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, what we're seeing with what I call neoliberal mindfulness is its function is to deflect attention away from the social and political and economic structures which are causing so much human misery and distress in society. So by individualizing it, it becomes easily co-opted as a tool for social control and self-pacification. So the rhetoric that you hear is that happiness is just a skill that's not dependent on any external resources. You could just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and we can like train and hack our brains, and it's all the product of individual effort, which resonates almost seamlessly with the neoliberal agenda.
Yeah, and the way I understand it, the Buddhist idea of mindfulness, one important factor of it is kind of letting go of the idea of self, letting go of the ego, whereas in this capitalist mindfulness, that's nowhere to be found. Is that right?
Well, I think that's partly true, that there's kind of a focus on me, myself, and mine. If that was the mantra, that's what the modern mindfulness movement is chanting, so to speak. It's kind of focus on hedonic happiness. So this is connected in many ways to how it's linked to Western consumerism, because when you put mindfulness and you strip it of its ethical teachings and its embeddedness within a context that was meant, as you said, to transcend the ego, to become more selfless, less selfish, and so forth, then it kind of actually morphs into a technique that could be even enhancing our sense of self and our sense of importance. And so it sort of thrives in our individualistic culture of narcissism in many ways.
So how can mindfulness be used in the more correct manner, the non-corporatized, non-privatized manner in order to help people?
Well, one of the points is that it has to go beyond just being a form of stress reduction, an individualistic biomedical therapeutic practice. It has to be politicized. And then what I mean by that is that just listening to a meditation app and sitting in silence is not going to cut it anymore. What we need to do is turn our attention, using mindfulness, but turning our attention to actually the sources of suffering that are existing in the structural systems, the systems, political systems, economic systems, and use it in a way that we can have a more civic form of mindfulness that pulls people together, and we can begin to share in community our shared vulnerabilities to suffering and talk about these things. So we need to move away from just privileging silence in these sorts of settings and open it up to critical inquiry. In other words, let's really have a conversation. If I'm angry and I'm in a mindfulness program, rather than telling that person, well, just go back to watching your breath, let's ask them, why are you angry? How's it connected to your political, your work context, whatever it may be? And so to put together, to bring together, mindfulness actually means remembering. The true meaning of mindfulness means remembering. And I sort of use this as remembering ourselves as a collective, putting our collectivities back together, building solidarities using mindfulness, like the Extinction Rebellion is doing now. They're combining mindfulness practices as a form of spiritual activism. And so I think this is really the way we can take it away from the market ideology and being captivated by capitalist forces and redirect it more towards civic mindfulness or social mindfulness, if you want to call it that.
Speaking of those capitalist forces, have you gotten any response from the big mindfulness brands or the companies? And if not them, what about from the fans of the capitalist form of mindfulness?
Oh, yes. I've received some fairly contested emails, if you want to call them that. I think when you have a vested interest financially in these programs, you're obviously going to come out of the woodwork and start defending your brand, which is, not really that unsurprising.
Yeah, and anything that goes against billions of dollars in income and profits is not appreciated by certain entities in our society. Well, Mr. Purser, thank you so much for being here. The book, again, is Mindfulness, How Mindfulness Became the New Capitalist Spirituality. And I assume that that's available everywhere people can find books. Is that correct?
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lee.
We have to go to a quick break, but I have added live stand-up comedy events in Toronto, Canada, as well as Los Angeles and Ventura, California, Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin, and of course, Washington, D.C. Tickets are at redactedtour.com. You can also text the word redacted to 444-999 to sign up to our free email list, because we are suppressed and censored online all the time. And so really, the only way to find out about all our stuff is to text redacted to 444-999. That'll get you on a free email list. All right, I'll be right back with a lot more.
There's so much going on in the world, don't you think? When's the last time you had a real bird's eye view of things? Should the news be more than just hours of bickering? Give me 30 minutes, and I'll take you across the globe.
Your world, wired as never before. Veins of information twisting every way. Let me untangle these countless threads. Just press play.
What'd you have for breakfast yesterday? Why would you pick those shoes? How fast is your Wi-Fi? What's your dog's name? Why'd you name him that? What's your biggest fear in life? Ever been on a hayride? When's the last time you read a book? What would you say if you ever met the Pope? Who's the best quarterback of all time? What's one topping that doesn't belong on a pizza? Now I've interviewed you too. Question more.
Welcome back to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm still Lee Camp. Without further ado, here is the founder and executive director of Crushing Colonialism, Jen Deerenwater. Jen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
It's good to finally have you on. So you tackle so many issues, but I want to try and narrow it down to a few here, if I can do it. You founded and had the organization Crushing Colonialism. Can you talk for a minute about your goals with that organization and how you go about achieving those goals?
So we are an international indigenous multimedia collective, and what we do is we use media, different forms of media as a way to advance Native and indigenous issues across the world. And so the way in which we do that is we're not necessarily a news site, but we support indigenous media makers. So this can be sculptors, writers who do lit, it can be documentarians, journalists like myself. And the idea is to help us get better jobs, get better wages, get the fellowships, get the grants, get the supports that we need to do this work. Part of what led me to this was just my own work in journalism as a freelancer and feeling like I didn't have a lot of supports as a result of being freelance. And, the only news coverage we have in the U.S. is 0.01% on Native people. That's all the news coverage we receive. So it's really important that we are supporting indigenous media makers.
So that's great. So it serves as kind of a signal boost for media makers out there. So as you just mentioned, Native American issues get very little to no news coverage. One that did become kind of a national story in the past year was Elizabeth Warren running for president. She releases her DNA testing showing she's, I don't know if it was like 1% Native or something. And even now, today, almost every week, Donald Trump has some mention where he calls her Pocahontas, where he somehow is managing to both be insulting to her and insulting to Native Americans all at the same time. But, you know, what Warren did is also insulting. So talk about both of these factors and what they mean.
Well, I mean, first I want to start by saying that the average American, the average non-Native American rather, doesn't know really anything about us. Our schools don't teach our history, they don't teach an accurate history, and they often don't teach past the 1800s. You know, it's not rare for me to encounter people who are surprised that Native people still exist. You know, I often hear people refer to us in the past tense as if we're all dead, and unfortunately a lot of us were murdered under settler colonialism and genocide, but we are still here. And these DNA tests don't actually prove indigeneity. They're racist pseudoscience. You can't actually prove ethnicity or race on these tests. And furthermore, the part that I think a lot of people don't really understand is that Native people, while we've been racialized through white supremacy and colonialism, we're actually distinct sovereign nations. And that's something very different than just being an ethnic or racial group.
Right.
So DNA tests, regardless of what they say, are never going to prove indigeneity. It's never going to show the tribal nation. And it's really insulting for me as somebody who is a citizen of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma to know what my ancestors went through. You know, 1/3 of our people died on the trail where they cried. You know, and what people also don't understand is it wasn't just the removal from our land. There were hundreds of years of mass rape, murder, villages being burned, our children being murdered and slaughtered, long before that removal even happened. So we already have all of this trauma on top of us. Then we lose our land in the southeast. We get moved to present-day Oklahoma, then referred to as Indian Territory. And not even 100 years later, Oklahoma statehood occurred, and they did the land run where non-Native people, mostly white people from all over the world, not even just America, came, lined up at a starting point, a pistol fired, and they went off and literally stuck a stake in the ground and said, "This is mine."
Right, literally the American government just said, if you get out there at this particular time, you can just have the land.
Right, so this is the second time we've had our land taken from us, and Warren's family is a part of this history. So not only is she not Cherokee, but her family has taken an active role in our genocide. Rebecca Nagel, who's also a citizen of Cherokee Nation, just came out with an article talking about Warren's family and how one of her family members went to Tennessee and took part in murdering us. And then they went to Oklahoma and took our land there. So for me, as someone whose family and ancestors have suffered this genocide, I'm watching how my people are still suffering to this day. We have the highest rates of sexual assault, kidnapping, trafficking, murder by police, the worst health care. I mean, these issues go on. And to see someone like Warren, who has no claims to us, no ties to us, is not one of us, turn around and use our identity as a way to further her education and career, well, that's just a slap in the face to every Indigenous person.
And you're one of the, you were telling me before, you're one of the few Native journalists that's even gotten to question her. Did she respond to your questions?
She did. She was quite smug, I have to say. I just happened to be at the right time at the right place. Warren was at an event speaking at a National Congress of American Indians event last year, and I just happened to get a few questions in with her. And my last question was asking her, you know, what about your claims to Cherokee Nation? And she very arrogantly said, "I know who my family is." And I will never forget that. When I hear Natives saying that Warren is good for us, that's really harmful, and that's really painful. And it continues to tell other non-Natives that it's okay what she's doing.
So to slightly shift gears, but still something that has been a mainstream story, has been these pipeline fights that are ongoing in many parts of the country. You know, pipelines and the fossil fuels and climate change getting us to the point where we're kind of on the brink of extinction if we don't do something soon. That seems like an issue that impacts all of us. Why is it such a Native-specific fight? It seems like a lot of the time.
I think part of that is that we're the ones that feel the greatest impact of global climate chaos. You know, it's our remaining lands that have some of the world's largest uranium deposits, oil. you know, and then these pipelines, when their routes are planned, they often go right by reservations or reserves or tribal villages. So it's directly impacting us.
I remember this in North Dakota. They were planning on going through a mostly white area, kind of people, suburbanites, people with money. And then they realized, oh, politically, that's difficult. So we'll shift gears and go through Standing Rock.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is common. We see it in Canada. We see it, you know, throughout the so-called Americas. We see this in other lands like Australia. They have the world's largest uranium deposit on Aboriginal land there. You know, so this is a really severe problem for us. You know, we already have people like the Ile de Jean Charles Nation who are climate refugees. Like their land is almost gone from the rising seawater. So I think that's part of why we're the ones that are often on the front lines, but it's also because our spirituality, our culture, our religion, our food, our language, our ways are so intrinsically tied to our lands. You know, and I think a lot of non-natives don't understand that. For us, it's not going to a church or a synagogue or mosque, it's being on our land.
Right.
And seeing that harmed or not having access to it means that we can't practice our religions freely.
Right. So I guess that's part of a factor is most or maybe all, forgive my ignorance, I don't know, but native belief systems seem to view the natural world as either a mother or a provider or something, whereas, you know, capitalism views it as just something to be exploited until it's dead.
Right. Yeah, I mean, make money at all costs, which that will often mean sacrificing the earth and sacrificing marginalized people. You know, I've covered quite a bit on different pipelines.
Yeah, can you talk about the Mountain Valley Pipeline, where that stands now?
Yeah, so I was just out at the Yellowfinch camp a few weeks ago. That's in a western part of Virginia on the route for Mountain Valley Pipeline. So MVP is around 300 miles. It's going to move highly volatile, highly pressured fracked gas through a 42-inch diameter pipeline that's going over very steep mountains. This is the first pipeline of this magnitude to go through southern Appalachia. You know, they've already had a lot of problems with sediment and erosion not being properly controlled, so people's water are getting contaminated. There have been, I believe, about 40 arrests so far. As we often saw with Dakota Access Pipeline and other pipeline fights, the police are very deeply in cahoots with MVP.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard that some of the police actually, when they're off work security for the pipeline.
Right.
Which,
off work, yeah.
Yeah, which is not uncommon. So yeah, that fight it's still ongoing. It's going to be ongoing for a while, and there are multiple fronts that it's occurring. There are the tree sits at Yellowfinch Camp. They've, you know, people out there resisting this pipeline have done monopods, sky pods, you know, and then there's multiple legal battles around various permits that have been pulled. I think one of the things that's very telling about this particular pipeline is that FERC actually pulled a permit. And FERC is essentially just a rubber stamping agency.
Yeah, FERC, for those who don't know, FERC is the regulatory commission that decides whether pipelines can go through or not, but the 99% or something of the permits are all approved.
Right.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, that will definitely be an ongoing fight. In these last couple of minutes, I wanted to move to the issue of monuments, which has become a kind of national fight. Much of it is talked about Confederate monuments, but there's something else to be said here about, you know, monuments and how they show how much we value or don't value Native Americans in our society.
I think that, you know, it's obviously anti-Native, but it's, you know, of course, also anti-Black. There's a lot of problems with these things. You know, when I have to go over by the White House for, you know, rallies or just walking through the area, you know, I have to see a statue of President Andrew Jackson. That's the man responsible for my people's removal.
Right.
You know, he was a slave owner. He was a horrible human being, yet here is this monument right next to the White House, which is ironic that that's the name of it, considering it's on stolen Native land and was built by Black slaves. But there has been a particular fight recently that is in San Francisco there's a mural. It's called Pioneer Mural, and it's on the wall of a public high school there. And this mural is just awful. It's depicting natives, being murdered, and white people taking over and being these great conquerors. And so there was a fight to try to get this mural removed, and unfortunately, there were some votes recently, and the mural is going to stay. So, when I walk through any part of America every day, I see some way in which colonizers are being upheld, whether it's me going to the grocery store and having to see somebody wearing the DC football team.
That's amazing that I don't know, still exists. Like the fight bubbles up every couple of years, and then it just the football team remains being called what it is.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't even understand what that word is, or why it's so problematic to use Native people as mascots. But I also don't think they really understand the trauma that comes with it. Living in DC and having to see people wearing, having stickers on their cars or wearing T-shirts and things that have a disembodied Native head on it.
Right.
That has a word that literally only exists from when the U.S. government paid white men to kill us. Like, that's really traumatic, and I don't think people understand the depths that goes.
Yeah, I mean, if it were a word that derogatory about so many other groups, it would be taken down in a second.
Yeah.
There's certain words that are equivalent that we can't say in public for good reason.
Right.
And yet this is the name of a football team. Anyway, we're out of time here, but the organization is Crushing Colonialism. How can people keep up with your work?
So they can go to crushingcolonialism.org, learn a little bit about us, sign up to follow us. We have, of course, Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter. And so people can follow us, see what we're doing that way. They can also make donations to help us keep going. Because as I said, only 0.01% of news coverage is on Indigenous issues, but only 0.02% of philanthropic giving goes to Native organizations, and only 0.02% of that goes to Indigenous media.
Well, thank you so much for doing your part to change that and to make people aware.
Yeah, thank you.
That's our show, but if you want more, I put up web-exclusive videos almost every day at youtube.com/Redacted Tonight. Hit subscribe, hit the bell icon so they'll actually let you know about the videos. That's youtube.com/Redacted Tonight. Until next time, good night, and keep fighting.